Hello, America. Welcome to the Junto Podcast, where we promote the practical applications of critical thinking and bold creativity. I'm your host, Edgar Mills. Thank you for joining us. Hey, America. Welcome back to the Junto Podcast, and we're on episode 53. Thanks for staying around. All right. So, past couple episodes, we've been on a theme, a little bit of a theme, not specified, but we've talked a lot about leadership and business and different traits and characteristics that you might want to latch onto as a leader. And today, specifically, I want to talk about one of the most sort of succinct and simple frameworks of mission analysis, whether it's a high stakes, combat mission, or whether it's a project, at your company, high stakes, sort of high dollar project, and the execution of that. And and then I want to take that framework and merge it with one of the most comprehensive outlines of leadership characteristics that I've seen. So, retired Admiral William McRaven, you may know of him, and you may have feelings about him one way or the other. But that's not what we're talking about. Any of his post-military, whatever, it's irrelevant here. I worked under McRaven twice, once when he was the SOCUR commander, and then once when he was the U.S. SOCOM commander. And I think he's a smart guy. Yeah, he's a smart guy. And he wrote a book called Spec-Ops. All right, let me set this up. He's Navy, right? So it's not special operations, it's Spec-Ops. At any rate, I think his master, I don't know if he's got a doctorate or not. I think just master's thesis when he was in the War College or whatnot was these case studies he did, and he made a book out of it. And the book is called Spec-Ops, Case Studies in Special Operations Warfare, Theory and Practice. Now, this is these are all case studies on wars gone by. Anyway, let me continue on here. So, from that book, he outlines some core principles that he pulled out of these 8 studies. And again, these were all like legendary raids from past wars, anywhere from World War II all the way up to, I want to say, possibly Somalia, maybe Grenada. I don't think it wasn't into the global war on terror yet. But these core principles that he pulled out of these raids, and the question he was answering was, what makes special operations special operations? What is a special operation versus a conventional, operation? But the principles, however, we're going to stack those up against modern business models. And furthermore, I've been dropping John C. Maxwell a lot lately. Now, I've read his book, 21 Laws of Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, twice already, and I reference it a lot, and because I'm trying to soak it all in. But it works. It works. It's good. And like I said, it reads like a textbook, and so does McRaven's book. Kind of reads like a textbook. Which, I'm a simple human. I'm a simple animal. I'm not an intellectual friggin' dynamo. All right, I need simplicity. In the textbook, it's easy for me to pull it apart and take it in. Now, all these principles we're going to talk about, and then these leadership traits and whatnot, as they match up against your business, it is already implied that everybody up and down the chain is technically and tactically proficient, that they know their job, that they're technically proficient at their job, and they know how it fits into the broader structure. That's not advanced level stuff. That's just everybody knows their job. So we're going on that assumption, right? Everybody knows their job. In whatever field, it doesn't matter. Everybody knows their job. Okay, now back to it. In the book, McRaven's book, Spec-Ops, he broke down 8 real world, what were special operations or small unit raids and whatnot. One of them, I'm not going to name them all, but one of them was the raid on Ibn Amel, and that was in Second World War. As was there was a midget submarine attack on the Tirpitz, which was a big battleship. And then he looked at the raid on Entebbe, the hostage rescue that the Israelis did in Uganda. And he looked at the Sante raid, and that's just to name a few. Now, if those of you who are familiar with the Sante raid, and you may say, oh, well, that was a failed raid. Well, yes, intelligence was faulty on that, or maybe even just slow, but the raid itself, any Green Beret will tell you, and at SWIC, where the Special Forces Schoolhouse, that raid was essentially a textbook, perfectly executed raid. Anyway, that's just a few of them. And what he did was he distilled down a very clear, succinct theory called relative superiority. Because again, the question is, what makes special operations special? Well, one of the common themes in special operations is that you have a much smaller group of humans versus a much larger group of humans. And so the theory of relative superiority says that the gist of it is that a small outnumbered force can beat a much larger, better defended force by creating a decisive edge or a pivotal moment in the execution, and then being able to hold that moment and hold that edge just long enough to ensure mission success. And that's the point of relative superiority. Once you've reached that point, now there's a chart out there, and we'll talk about it in a minute, but once you've reached that point of relative superiority, that moment once you've reached that, all the friction and chaos and all the gunfighting and all this stuff, it doesn't matter. Once you've reached that point, you are going to win. You may take casualties, yes, or something, but once you've reached the point of relative superiority, the outcome it's yours. You're going to win. And what he points out in here is all these raids, well, especially the successful raids, but Sante as well. I don't want to say that Sante wasn't successful and just didn't accomplish the goal of rescuing those hostages. But all these things, all these 8 case studies he did, and they were pretty different too. They had the same 6 principles, and he broke these 6 principles down into phases of the overall operation. And so they happened over the course of 3 different phases. And we're just going to briefly go over them, and then we'll get in deeper detail into them here in a minute. So of the 3 phases, there's the planning phase and the preparation phase and the execution phase. And then of the 6 principles, during the planning phase, there's simplicity, right? A simple plan, keep it simple. And then in the preparation phase, there's security and repetition, and we'll go into these. And then during the execution phase, there's surprise, speed, and some of you are going to say violence of action. Purpose. Surprise, speed, and violence of action is the principles of CQB, which is great on a very small scale. But purpose, especially over a long protracted operation or project that you're working on, the violence of action is hard to keep up at a high level. But purpose, right? Everybody knows the purpose of this whole thing. That's what's important. And he backs these principles up with a graph that I talked about a minute ago of the relative superiority graph, which is pretty sweet. It's I don't want to say it's simplistic. It's simple, but not simplistic. And it plots, it's got like an area of vulnerability, right? When you're going into a project or into the operation, there's a space to where you're most vulnerable. And then during that, and that's before you actually hit an objective or whatever, you're vulnerable at being found out, so that the execution of the mission is sure to fail. Right. And there's the fog of war kind of pulls you in, and all the friction that's where you're most susceptible to it. And on this graph, he also kind of has little points for moral factors like courage and trust and drive, right? Those are the things that, yeah, they're team trait, but they're individual traits. And it's this small group of individuals acting in concert, but the individual's got to have these factors, these moral factors. And that's what carries you through, well, tough stuff, And anyway, if you get these principles right, you are exponentially more apt to succeed, even if like conventional odds are against you, right? Because conventional odds are going to tell you that a smaller organization cannot beat a larger organization. Just resources, numbers, manpower, etc. But if you get these principles right, you can, whether it's a combat operation or whether it's a small startup. All right, so now let's break them down a little bit, these principles, and see how they really affect us. So simplicity, the principle of simplicity, that lives in the planning phase. I did a podcast on the show Shorzy, talking about his leadership, and one of his primary things was you got to keep it simple. Keep it simple. So in your plan, whatever your plan is, your plan needs to have sort of like the fewest, like objectives. Like have a primary objective to work for. If there's a bunch of scattered about objectives, people and ideas and things start to get fragmented, and priorities start to get sort of confused and muddled. So have, one or two main, priority objectives, and then have a clean plan that's yeah, easy to understand. I don't care if you're a big brain intellectual. Simple plans usually work better, period. And then have it, as much as possible, have minimal moving parts. Now, it depends on the job. Everybody has a role, but in the business world, again, there's priorities. So whatever your moving parts are, you've got a few that are the main effort, right? So have minimal moving parts. Because complex things that on paper they sound just whiz bang and stuff like that, that the execution somewhere along the way, the missteps and mistakes, they compile and they accumulate. So keep it simple. Businesses that are wildly successful, their strategies are pretty simple and pretty clear. Yeah. Don't chase, 10 different priorities. Pick the one that matters most and take that objective. And then if you need to pick another objective that matters most, do so. But I ain't saying just do one task at a time. We're well beyond, kindergarten level stuff. You can do multiple things, but your priorities, you need to have one priority at a time. Simplicity, keep it simple. And everybody says, KISS. You'll hear this a lot. Keep it simple, stupid. No. That's not correct. Keep it short and simple. That's correct. That's the KISS principle. Keep it short and simple. And then you have security, the principles of security and repetition. And this is during the preparation. So planning, right, we got the plan. Now we're starting to put the pieces together to make the execution possible. Well, security in the military, clearly security matters extreme. But if you're doing a deal, a thing, if you're a software developer, you're a video game developer, things like that, you have intellectual property that needs to be protected. And you lock that plan down so that leaks aren't getting out there and the competition is getting wind of what you got going on, and then they undermine you because they're bigger and they can put more resources at a thing. So they get your idea, then they throw the resources at it before you have a chance to. So you see what I'm saying as far as that goes? Security does matter, right, in the civilian world. But guess what matters to everyone? Repetition. And what does repetition mean? Well, I'm going to say in this context, it means rehearsals. Now, I can tell you this, rehearsals for a combat operation are absolutely critical. Absolutely critical. And I mean, like, yeah, you walkthroughs, talk-throughs, full dress rehearsals. It might not be on the objective, right, that you're going to go hit, but you can do something similar in a different place. You can still hit all the moving parts and make sure everybody is synced up. That is absolutely critical. Rehearsals. So that your task, whatever your element, your team, your little crew, that it's burned into your subconscious. You know what you're going to do. And then you're going to know what you're going to do in a result of any kind of contingency that may pop up, any unforeseen. And that repetition and those rehearsals build confidence, folks. I say this all the time in training firearms. The more meaningful repetitions you get in and you start to see your skill come up, the more confident you are. And the more confident you are, the more open you are to actually applying yourself to becoming better and better. And it just builds on itself. The positivity, the goodness builds on itself. And now you're no longer scared of failure, right? You're not worried about looking bad in front of someone else, or you're not worried about dropping a ball. Those fears are mitigated down because you have built skill and knowledge to mitigate that fear. And then, and that becomes routine. That becomes the way you do business. Then again, security matters in the civilian world. You don't want your competitors or rivals. You don't want them knowing what you got going on. If you're in a competitive type market, I mean, everybody is. That's capitalism. Everybody's competing for market shares. Yeah. So your circle. Remember, we talked about trusted circles during the 21 laws. There, if you're having little strategy meetings, and then you got somebody in your crew that may be unhappy and they may be looking to move somewhere else, and you sit and talk about some very unique strategy and very specific intellectual property, and then boom, they bust out and go get a job with the other guy. Yeah, that's bad. So trusted circle, it matters. So security and repetition or rehearsals, that's during the preparation, right? And then we have the execution phase. Surprise, speed, and purpose. Well, surprise, yeah, man, if you're the first company to drop a new thing, especially technological advancements, if you're the first company to really get a grasp on it and put it into action, that's good. That gives you an advantage for sure. And it's good to try. Now there are some ideas that you put them in the oven and you let them cook for a long time. And then there's some ideas that they're inspired and you want to action them straight away as thoroughly as possible. Yes. But fast in order to seize the moment, because we talked about the law of timing as well. You want to be able to seize the moment. It might be the right time for that thing that nobody else has quite yet got. So there's a lot of factors going into to the speed part and the surprise part. But purpose, I think more important than speed and surprise is purpose. And purpose is the thing that keeps your team, one, focused, and two, when bullets start flying, sure, but when the distractions, right, when things start trying to derail your plan, that sense of purpose that everybody has and that you as a leader instill, that's what keeps you on track. Purpose, motivation, direction. Boom, there it is. So that purpose is what keeps everything moving in the correct direction. And from this deep understanding of purpose, everybody's got to be bought into that. And we've talked about that, buy-in, right? That's why it's important that every individual on the team understand the purpose so that they can buy into it. Because if they do understand the purpose and then they disagree with it, we got a problem. We got a problem. Got to have buy-in. And then that understanding and buy-in is what affects all your moral factors, right? The drive and the stick to itness, whatever they call it. The moxie. That's what keeps it. That buy-in is what keeps that stuff tight. Your individual character traits, that help you get past the bumps in the road and defeat the friction. There's always friction, man. There's always friction. So this theory, this special operations theory of relative superiority, translates straight into any boardroom or any business, any warehouse, anything, because it parallels. I mean, the parallels. That's why the parallels with military execution and business execution. Well, I mean, let's just go back to the OSS. I'm gonna get side rail here for a sec, but I just want to talk about why these days there are very, very, very many retired military people doing leadership coaching or CEO of whatever business. They're leaders in the civilian world. And this goes way back, obviously, right? If we go even back further, we got West Point and you're back then it was not so much, right? Back in the old days, the enlisted men were just labor. And then you had all your highly educated upper class people who went to be officers. But guess what? Naturally kind of leveled that out a little bit. Combat did. Yes. All throughout time, throughout the history of the United States, combat kind of leveled that gap out, because in combat, smart guys, enlisted guys, right? Whether they're formally smart or not, they emerge. They rise to the top a little bit. And then you got all these, not all right, some educated upper crust officer types who can't or couldn't function in the heat of the moment and the friction and the fog of war and all that. And I've seen that in action, actually. But the military teaches a whole lot of leadership principles, characteristics, how to function practically as a leader. And a combat operation is no different than a product launch. There's a whole planning phase. So businesses out there now that's where I was going. I wanted to bring up OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, and back in World War II. They were only around for a few years. I think from 41 or 42 to 45. But what the OSS did, that was special operations, and they were kind of modeled after the British Special Operations Executive, their version. And you could say there was spy stuff there, and there was some spy stuff there, but it was special operations, small unit operations. And I point you to the Jedburghs, and then even the operational groups that went and were force multipliers, they went and trained up indigenous forces. But even then, they took educated men. The OSS recruited, Ivy League types. They recruited CEO types. And back in the 40s, they recruited professional athletes. Yeah. Language was a desired thing. Men who had traveled the world as civilians or whatnot, they were desired. And so these men who were already successful at civilian type things, business and whatnot, especially like high level, corporate type stuff, they were now doing special operations. Well, they didn't have to relearn everything, right? They instituted things and these men were recruited and sought after for their ability to operate successfully in ambiguity. Because one of the Jedburghs, for instance, there would be an American officer who would, smart guy, probably an American radio operator who was enlisted, and then like a foreign guy, a Belgian guy or French guy or whatever. 3 dudes would jump in Europe and behind Nazi occupied territory and just, hey, go about your business and report once in a while. Let us know what's going on. Go build a resistance. So you have to be smart. You have to be adaptable. You have to be all those things. And these were businessmen doing that. The OSS, I think, and you know what? Now that I think about it, I think there was a catchphrase called like the gentleman warrior or something. Don't quote me on that. Something to that effect. They called them gentleman warriors or something. Yeah. So anyway, back to it. There's parallels, good people. There's parallels that, well, if you ignore, especially when you have things, the internet exists. There's no reason not to let information at least look at it. But businesses, and I'm saying especially small businesses, but even big businesses, if you operate like a special operations team, you're going to win. You're going to succeed. And like I said, I'm thinking like startups or these elite consulting firms that are lean. You got 4 or 5 like superheroes on your staff there, and then just a minimal administrative staff. You're very focused. They achieve relative superiority on a daily basis just by doing the work and hustling. A small like tech startup who's putting out some bizarre app with maybe 15 engineers, they can outmaneuver a Fortune 500 behemoth because they're small and agile and they keep plans simple. And it's easy to guard your intellectual property on a smaller scale. And they can do meaningful rehearsals on their product launches or whatever, or just the product itself, making sure it is tuned up correctly. They have the time to rehearse those things until everything is all synced up. And then they can drop their product, hit the market fast and hard, deliver fast, because it's based on one crystal clear mission, one crystal clear priority. And for examples, like I said, I'm not a business analyst or anything like that, but if you look at early SpaceX when it first started up, yeah, they were lean, man. And you're thinking, why does NASA take all this money and they can't put out, allegedly we went to the moon in 60-something-3. What was it? I don't know, 63 or 64. We haven't been back since. NASA, it's a behemoth. SpaceX is up launching rockets all the time. Some of them blow up, some of them don't. They're just fighting through. You got early Airbnb. You remember that? What a great idea Airbnb was. They were small, but they had very minimal bureaucracy. And it was a great idea. And then people started taking advantage. And then when advantage is taken, then you got to go. I got to sue these people because they had a friggin' party in my house that I live in, 9 months out of the year, and destroyed things. There's always something. It always gets tainted, but yeah, those companies in the early stages, SpaceX, Airbnb, they were small, agile, low bureaucracy, and they got things going, man. They did things. Now, I said even big companies. So think about this. Even in big, gigantic firms, you can deploy, you can organize small groups within, right? Small teams, surgical teams, that can turn around projects quick and efficiently. And they can operate like a special operations team. And they can deliver more sort of personalized delivery of whatever the product or the consulting or whatever it is, or service. And it's more personalized and it's very specific. And you can have a big impact if you break these teams up and let them operate in a somewhat autonomous way, right? They're not out there just willy-nilly doing whatever the hell they want. You still got to report back, but give your leaders enough autonomy to make decisions that, well, and it may be uncomfortable, right? The question is, do you trust your leaders, your mid-level leaders, your junior leaders, or your whatever project manager? Do you trust that person to make the right decisions instead of having to wait for him to send up, okay, are we allowed to do this? Then you got to go sit in a board meeting. Then with the board, hey, our guy down here doing this project that's 3 weeks overdue, he wants to do this, XYZ. Well, what do we think? Well, he's been blah, 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 blah. Come on, man. That's too much. It's not efficient. Bureaucracy. So I think small businesses kind of in general have more capacity for the 6 principles that we talked about and identified. The simplicity that smaller businesses are able to pivot and adapt quicker. Security, the smaller the team, the easier the security to maintain your uniqueness, your edge. Repetition, even. Everything's easier on a small scale, but that repetition helps them to stay smooth and consistent. And then the surprises, if you're a small business, maybe nobody's ever heard of you. And that's the one way to have this, the ability to disrupt the market with surprise, right? And it's easier for small elements to move faster. That's it. But speed is one of the things that helps you keep clients. Now, I'm of the opinion that customer service is king. And anytime I get inquiries, questions about courses, questions about whatever, I get a lot of them. I answer them. If not that evening, that day, the next morning. Less than 24-hour turnaround on things like that. Now, I may have dropped the ball once or twice, but generally speaking, inside of 24 hours, you're getting an answer on something. That's what, to me, builds client trust and longevity there, retainability. And then small teams, it's easy to have a less complex goal and purpose. And it's easy to get employees to buy in because they feel like they have a small company, very small company. Most employees, I think, feel like they have a little, not ownership, but a little bit, right? They're a part of it. They're part of it. They feel like it's maybe even like family in some cases. So that, to me, is why small businesses have an advantage over big businesses that are run by boards of old men making decisions based on just cold numbers and things like that. And that may be the way. Who knows? Cold numbers may be the way, but I don't think so. So the big businesses, I think, so especially like these massive, like legacy corporations, right? Everybody knows that out there in the world, like think of a grocery store and everything inside that grocery store, all the various products, to include the medication over in the pharmacy, all of those things are owned by like 7 corporations. And they're making all the money, and that's great. But the levels and layers that they have to deal with on approvals of things and changes and whatnot. And they got these massive, 800-page strategy decks that reads like the national security strategy, It's madness. And then you got, like I said, these boards and these committees of old dudes who are risk averse, or they don't understand the changing culture or whatnot. They eventually they drown themselves in what is just self-imposed complexity. The Army's horrible about the self-imposed complexity, like the big Army. And in these big corporations, there's always leaks, because they have endless meetings with different people from different sections and this and that and the other. And they always inevitably have leaks. And then do they do rehearsals? Maybe down at the smallest team level, possibly, but really they just kind of check the block. They just do what they've always done. And they move at the speed of frickin' glaciers across the Arctic Circle. And that stuff, whatever their company purpose was when it began in 1890 something or whatever, it gets diluted, and it starts the purpose starts conflicting with all the administrative, like the key performance indicators. That's one of those catchphrase acronym, KPI. So now you got all these check the blocks that got to happen. You got your red, yellow, and green blocks that you need to be in the green, whatever, down the board. And you got to track this, you got to track that. And then you got a tracker that tracks the tracker. If you're in the Army, you know what I'm talking about, the trackers that tracks the trackers. And now you're just chasing your quarterly earnings, or whatever. Or you're chasing government contracts. Everybody wants a piece of the government contract. But along with that government contract comes all the red tape. Yep, all the red tape, all the requirements. Now you got to jump through all these government hoops. You might not even you're a small, agile company, but you got to have this and you got to have that. And you got to have your cage number and you got to have this insurance and you got to have that. And then that's your area of vulnerability when you're fighting for those things, because other companies will undercut you that are bigger. Yeah. Or the approval, just waiting on the government to approve a thing can take months and months and months. So the big business is doing that. They kind of have an in already. Think Lockheed Martin. Did you know, because of this Iran situation, the Navy just awarded Lockheed Martin a $1.5 billion project for a new, I think, rocket of some sort. I think it was Orwell or somebody said wars. We used to build weapons to fight war. Now we fight war to build the weapons to get those contracts. Now you guys are going to ask my opinion on Iran. Iran's bad. Leadership's bad. It is an evil regime. But I'm also a libertarian. I think everything, when it comes to combat, some conventional war is just inevitable. But I think a lot could be done with special operations in a surgical, more low-key way. And that's not to mean without oversight or visibility. That just means more surgical, more efficiently. But anyway, carrying on. Yeah, I think small companies, when you start trying to dabble with the big boys, it's gonna bog you. It's gonna start to add layers of things that you don't really want. And I think what these big companies that go after these government contracts and these big deals, I think that opens space up, though, for small companies to get market share just in a different way. The people that those big companies kind of ignore. Yeah. The behemoths, the big ones out there, they kind of assume superiority because of their size. But I think they're vulnerable to lose little bits of market share. It might not matter much to them even, but what's a little to them, it might be a lot to you as far as business goes. But I think their systems, the older ways, I think the big companies are slower to modernize, and I think that creates, well, friction for them, but an opening for small businesses to sneak in there and get some of that market share. That's what I think. So, the 21 irrefutable laws of leadership from John Maxwell. Not only do they complement McRaven's relative superiority framework and the principles that we outline, but I mean they complement perfectly, both of them, because any operation, which we're talking McRaven with operations here, and then we're talking Maxwell with like leadership traits. You got to have them both. Leadership, it's got to be there no matter what the op. So they build on each other and they feed each other. And the leadership ability and quality that Maxwell tells us about is the law of the lid. The leadership ability and quality is what tops your organization out. As a leader, you are, well, in military parlance, you're responsible for what the organization does or fails to do. So is your lid, can you raise that lid? Yeah, so that your organization can rise up to it. If you raise your lid, the whole organization, the whole team rises. But keep your lid low, right? Stay very restrictive and not open to adaptability or even new techniques and things like that. And the most brilliant plans are going to fail because when it comes time that there is some unknown, some change that gets interjected and you're not willing to deal with it. And then go back to the law of influence. People follow you because of you, not because of the position that you occupy. Like by default, yeah, you'll do what your boss says. But when it comes down to like purpose, well, we'll say it again, purpose, motivation, and direction. Are you providing that? Is this guy who works for you, are you providing him those things? Or is this guy who works for you, he'll do what you say, right? But he's always looking for another job. So again, and that's sort of the old military leader definition, influencing others to complete the mission by providing purpose, motivation, direction. If you're not doing that as a leader, if you're just given instruction, not even instruction, orders, this needs to be done, that needs to be done. Yeah, don't micromanage, but hey man, motivate. Well, not even motivate, just give clear purpose and direction even. Yeah, just clear purpose and motivation, or direction, I mean. Those two things enough. Here's the purpose, and here's why it matters, and here's why it matters to you. And this is how we, roughly the way we want, and this is the end state. You ain't got to pump him up, tell him, all right, you're awesome, go. You ain't got to do that. Now, some people might. But without some genuine influence, and that's what all that is genuine influence, your team won't buy in, and they won't run toward gunfire, and they won't rise up to tight deadlines with any kind of efficiency or conviction, or, you know what I mean, with no buy-in. So you got to have the genuine influence. And then the law of process. This is as a leader and as a subordinate, you should be growing daily, right? But leaders aren't built in a day. They're always learning and growing too. I said, I think on the last episode, I wish I knew then what I know now. I wish. Leaders are not made in a day. You have a finite amount of time to develop before that opportunity is lost, and then you got to try again somewhere else. But the law of process perfectly complements the law, the principle of repetition from McRaven. Make those processes, refine them and rehearse them, refine them and rehearse them, refine them and rehearse them. Because you build your leadership in the same way that you drill room clearing, right? One task at a time, consistent performance, analyze it, see what you did right, wrong, and then do it again. Always implementing constant improvement. While navigation gives you the vision to chart the course, folks, but not only chart the course, but to articulate it well to your people. You can have something in your mind, and then garbage comes out of your mouth, and your entire staff and company is like, what the hell is he talking about? You got to sell the vision to your team too, not just your clients. You got to sell the vision to your team. You can't impose a vision onto your team. They have to understand it. So you have to sell your team just like you sell your clients. So Maxwell's 21 laws and McRaven's theory of relativity. Well, not theory of relativity. Holy shit. Not Albert Einstein. Theory of relative superiority. If you've trained with me, you've heard it over and over and over again. Know the difference between principles and techniques. Principles are foundational. They never change. They were developed over long history of analysis and trial and error. Okay, here are the principles that must be in place to make a thing successful. And then techniques, folks, are just different ways to implement those principles. Some are better than others. Some are more efficient than others. But you must have the principles in place. If you're out there doing a bunch of rando techniques that are not principally sound, you're losing. That's it. And those 6 principles from McRaven are foundational. They don't change. Now, good leadership is founded in principle too, but check it out. You still have to execute this. Leadership is as much technique as it is principle. Well, the principles must be in place, the leadership principles. But the techniques and the way you do that as a leader, as an individual leader, those techniques are to be developed, folks, and they may change. They may even change with personalities. You got one guy who responds to XYZ, and then you got a lady over here who responds way differently to different things. So your techniques you've got to be able to adapt and flow with the personalities you're dealing with the mission at hand. There are many missions out there that require sort of a directive leadership. I will, you go do this. And then there's other missions out there that's like, okay, guys, get together. What do you guys think? What if? What do you think about this versus that? You see what I mean? So you have to evolve your leadership techniques, and you have to be able to recall. So leadership, there are principles that guide that, but the delivery of the leadership is very much technique driven. Yeah, very much. Let's see here. Let's see. Where am I? I lost my place with my notes. Good leadership techniques. Yeah, that's it. And, by the way, those techniques, in special forces, every team has what you might call a little team culture, a personality. And that is usually set by like the team sergeant, usually. And for better or worse, you know what I'm saying? But still, that culture kind of develops around personality and leadership technique, kind of. And so if you're a leader and you respect the law of the lid, right? And you understand that your lid, your max capacity is the max capacity of the team. And you're open to raising that lid and don't accept, mediocre execution of things and don't accept mediocrity. That's where you're at on that. You accept that you're the barrier. So open the gate. Don't be the gate. And if you can master the law of influence, that's everybody's goal, right? Is to be able to influence people. But your ability to influence people is what keeps the purpose alive during like mission lag. Now, even in combat missions, there's ebbs and flows. There's downtime, and then there's hot. It goes back and forth, and you got to be able to kind of keep that in perspective. Because without leadership, folks, even the cleanest plan, as soon as it meets a little bit of friction, it's going to probably fail. Without the leadership, without good leadership. And throughout literature, throughout wars, throughout great companies and great professional sports teams and everything else, great leaders don't just apply the principles, folks. They embody the principles, right? And then they teach everybody else to embody the principles. Yeah. And through all that stuff, I know this seems like blah, blah, blah. That's how you make small teams able to achieve relative superiority in any market. Think like a small team, be a good leader, and develop your people with some genuine, just as a genuine human. And you will be able to achieve relative superiority. It may take longer than, who knows, but you'll be able to get there. So what's the takeaway here for the commercial business world? Because that's who I'm talking to. Not so much talking to the military guys. Everybody, everybody's got Rocco. No, not Rocco. Jocko. Everybody's got Jocko, and everybody's got all these vet bro podcasts that are leader. You be a perfect specimen. Blah blah blah. And there's probably plenty of commercial business podcasts out there on how to be the most efficient, most successful business ever. What's my takeaway for the commercial business world? Well, first, audit your next big project, whatever it is, against these 6 principles that I just laid out from Admiral McRaven. I mean, do an experiment, right? Just do an experiment. It ain't even got to be a big project. Okay, let's back up even. What's the takeaway for commercial business? Audit your next small project against these 6 principles, and let the team be somewhat autonomous as long as you provide clear purpose, motivation, direction, and a clear end state, a clear commander's intent. Is the plan simple enough for even a new hire to understand and furthermore explain it? Is the plan that simple? Are you rehearsing the critical tasks, and are you doing them with absolute 100% effort? Because even in rehearsals, it's still, you have to do it like it's real, like it matters. Do you move with speed and purpose? Or do you set something on the desk for a couple of days before you revisit it when it's meant to be your top task? Do those things. Bat your next project off of these 6 principles. And then next, as a leader, not your team, not your small team or the project that's going to launch there, check your leadership lid. Are you, as a leader, flexible? And are you growing as a leader? And are you allowing your team to grow, to adapt to problems, and to maybe look at new solutions? Are you adaptable? Is your leadership lid stopping something from happening? Even though it may happen in a way that you don't predict or don't necessarily want it to, are you stopping it from happening? All right. And then third, if you lead a big organization, all right, carve out small teams, small specialized teams, somewhat decentralized. They still need to answer to, there's still a hierarchy, but somewhat autonomous and decentralized. And let them operate under the parameters that you've given, and let them operate, like I said, with a level of autonomy. And then do some sort of supervision from a distance, and don't micromanage, and see what happens. If you give them clear purpose and direction, a clear end state, chances are they will deliver for you. Probably better than you imagine. Yeah. Give them the elbow room and see what happens. Now, if they failed spectacularly, well, that's a cue for you to start examining your sort of talent management. That's a catchphrase they used to use, but I guess it applies there. Do you have the right people for the right job? Yeah, do those things. Do those things. So McRaven showed us that a small force using these 6 principles can defeat a numerically superior, outgunned, outsized, out-resourced, larger force. And Maxwell shows us that the right leadership traits can take those principles from McRaven and make them unstoppable in any business, any project, if you apply those with good leadership, with the correct leadership. Put them together and be mindful, and you will be able to dominate your space. That is it, and that is all. Admiral William McRaven, Spec-Ops, Case Studies in Special Operations Warfare, Theory and Practice. And John C. Maxwell, 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. Those are 2 books that I've read both at least twice. I've read Spec-Ops a few times and think they're valuable. There's a lot that can be pulled from them. And you may consider them not to be very intellectually challenging, or you may consider them to be very succinct. I think they're very succinct. I like that they both, if you're in the mind to train from these like I am, they kind of read like textbooks a little bit. Not so much that you can't read in a flow, but in that you can pull things out of them and really analyze those things. So consider what I've said, folks. If you're a mid-level leader, a high-level leader, any kind of leader, consider these things. If you're a part of a team, consider these things. Are you a good teammate? Are you an indispensable teammate? And if you're a low-level member of some organization, ask yourself, do I know the purpose? Do I know the vision of this company? And do I agree with the vision? And I don't mean just lip service. Oh, the vision is to provide blah, 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 blah. No. Do you have a deep, intimate understanding of the vision? Well, as generations go by, I mean, people are getting more, I think smarter. Well, you might argue that people are getting dumber as well. Like, who knows what my podcast is doing to the greater society? Maybe making you dumber. I don't know. I don't think so. I'm trying to help make you smarter and be a more critical thinker. But ask yourself, if you're a new guy, young guy, if you're mid-20s, just now going into the workforce, and you've interned with a company for a couple years, and I mean, do you understand the culture and the vision of that company, and do you like it? And if you do, are you willing to go all in for it? Yeah. Ask yourself those things, folks. Thanks for listening to this one. I don't want to say I'm passionate about it, but I kind of got on a leadership kick there. And these are some of the main things that I take. Well, I don't want to say doctrine, but kind of the doctrine that I use during the 2 team guys stuff. I kind of use that. So thanks for listening to it. As always, please follow us on all the socials. Go look at ospreyshootingsolutions.com for all your shooting needs and competition and all the things. Please look at 2teamguys.com for all your leadership development and team training. Please continue to listen to the Junto podcast, which can be found at thejuntopodcast.com. And on that website, there's also links to all the other, at least 5 other podcast platforms. And then please consider giving to givesendgo.com/help-a-homie fund so that I can continue to help those in need within my reach. And beyond that, folks, please give me your feedback. I'm always looking for it, and I appreciate it. And I do take feedback seriously, and I do break it down and try to understand or whatever, especially if it's a counter argument to a thing. So I'm always open for that. And finally, if you know someone in Georgia, in the Northwest or North Georgia region, Metro Atlanta area, whoever who might want to be a guest on this podcast, or somebody who you think is compelling and that they should be a guest because they have something good to say, please share that with me, share it with them, and let's try to get something going. I love doing the interviews with folks. Okay, that's it, folks. I appreciate you guys for listening to me, and I appreciate all you do out there for whatever it is you do. All right, take care of each other, good people. I love you guys.